Hello, my name is Oluwatimi Osha. Today is April the 4th, 2026. We're about 36 days into the US Israeli Iran war. Um, Yesterday, we all got news of the strikes or the destruction of some US warplanes. Namely, there was an um, F-15E Strike Eagle, which had two pilots. Um, I guess, Iran's, um the Iranian forces were able to strike that warplane, and before its destruction, the two of the pilots were able to uh, eject themselves. One was rescued through, I guess, excuse me, U.S. Special Forces were able to um, rescue one of the pilots. There's an intense search for the second one through, by U.S. forces, of course, and of course, the Iranian state news actually issued a reward of roughly $60,000 in U.S. money, about 60,000 U.S. dollars, in the capture of that soldier. So he's missing right now, and so there's an intense search for him. Um, and then there was a second aircraft warplane that was hit, called an A-10 Warthog. Yeah, I don't get into the names of um, uh, these munitions, the arsenal. I don't get into the names, but just because today I wanted to do a rough analysis of the cost, what it's costing us. Um, And I hope that the soldier can be rescued. Of course, these are part of the losses, the cost of going to war. These are actually human lives, American soldiers, um, that uh, that it's costing us. It's costing us in terms of lives. I know the last time I checked the data, the comparative table, roughly 13 to 15 U.S. soldiers had been killed so far, and depends on which data you're looking at. Of course, some depending, maybe the U.S. and Israeli side may tend to minimize their data. Those other sources on the um, uh, Iranian side may tend to exaggerate their data, but roughly it's about over 500 uh, Americans may have been injured, soldiers may have been injured so far in Iran's strikes against military bases and the GCC nations, including in Iraq and other places where there are military bases. Um, so President Trump, of course, had indicated that the war would be winding up, and I guess the way it was interpreted, that it would end in 3 weeks, and people have thought that, well, he's sending mixed signaling. Military experts have said, well, because of the he's been sending mixed signaling because of the uh, excuse me, deployment of military forces, roughly 5,000, and there are about 10,000 there already. So 15 to 20, less than 20,000, roughly, in the theater. Um, Military experts had indicated that it was probably just posturing, because if boots on ground, a full scale ground invasion of a nation with 90 million people, uh, with the in a terrain that has the capacity to forge and force some kind of pincer a pincer mechanism on U.S. forces. America would need, say, a million, and so if America had put about 150,000 boots on ground, I mean, in the vicinity, then one would say, well, it's preparing for a full-scale in ground invasion. And of course, you would have seen military armored tanks and more material. That's not the case, right? So just the small numbers were indicative, suggestive at best that maybe the president, maybe the president, the Pentagon may have been planning to take um, one of the islands or Karg Island, and of course that would be a suicidal mission because um, those places have oil, and if the uh, the Iranian forces would of course would be firing their missiles on those. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah, something in my throat. Iranian, the U.S. forces would be sitting ducks for the missiles and the firepower of Iranian forces, which are just nearby, within the vicinity. And of course, because those are major oil depots, right? They've got oil, highly flammable. There'll just be explosions. The whole place would just be incinerated, right? Of course, that would adversely impact Iran's economy. But again, people who've been facing sanctions for over 40 years, they've they've adapted, right? They've adapted to a bad economy, right? So, and they're still in their own terrain. Remember what the Russians did in the war against the French, right? Napoleon thought, well, by just defeating them in battle, they would give up. But the Russians adopted a scorched earth policy. They burned down Moscow, right? Burned down Moscow, destroyed their agriculture, their lands, their agricultural products, used the scorched earth, tactic to starve the French. The French starved, but the Russians knew how to eat, how to survive in their own lands. The same thing. The Persians, the Iranians will know how to survive, how to get food from their neighbors, from their in their own land. They're in their own land, right? It's America that would have the problem with logistics, right? It will be a logistical nightmare. And remember, we're a democracy. We're a democracy. They need to get money from funding from Congress. Recently, the president was just trying to get a presented a 1.5 trillion dollar budget, right? Requesting 1.5 trillion dollars for the DoD, for the Pentagon, right? Called Department of War now, and hey, um, that's in addition to the earlier $200,000, sorry, $200 billion that was requested. So uh, the presence of troops, the presence of the Marines uh, in the Gulf area, that's just posturing to be able to probably be able to negotiate uh, uh, for a ceasefire. It's just to keep the Iranians guessing, but it's not sufficient. Again, the Iranians, they've shown they're determined to fight for to wait it out, to go the long haul, and they understand that uh, war for the Americans is also a war for the heart the heart of Americans and public opinion, right? And once public opinion is against the war, that's basically a cessation, a termination of hostilities, right? And that's something that they understand very well, and that's pretty much what's going on. Again, they see the polls as well that 60% of Americans are against the war, right? And the um, the American public just has no tolerance for this war at the moment. And apart from the cost, what I was going to do today was I was just going to apart from the cost in lives and the opportunity cost, because we spent roughly $1 billion to $2 billion a day on this war. So roughly, we're talking about 30 to $60 billion has been expended, and that's money going into the war is money that can't go into education, into our decrepit infrastructure, into healthcare, into other things that need fixing, right? Into even getting even if it's revamping our military. Uh, One thing this war does is, uh, again, the war you don't fight, is a war you don't lose. Now, when two unequally matched uh, adversaries engage one another in a war, right? Uh, like the heavyweight fighting somebody who is a featherweight, right? The featherweight is the underdog. The What ends up happening is, in anyhow, right? The featherweight, the lower, the underdog, right, elevated is elevated uh, in the sight of the world, right? While the one that was the superior force loses, at least, they drop a notch. At least they lose that air of invincibility, right? And that's what has happened to America, because again, Iran was not equally matched with us, right? Iran was never equally matched with America's military might. Um, we don't have any, in terms of the military. We didn't have any real. Um, we didn't really have any um, force that could match us, right, in terms of our military capacity, just because of the amount of money we spend on our military budget, right? Um, on weapons. The next, I think, seven, right? The next seven in line put together don't match us, don't match America's military budget, right? But what this war, this engagement, whatever you want to call it, this war, it exposes America's weaknesses, our strengths, to those who are real rivals. That's China, right? China, they're watching and they see the weaknesses. They're seeing our weaknesses now. We had claimed, President Trump had claimed just a few days ago in his speech on April the 2nd, that the U.S. had air supremacy, right? Air supremacy, and they destroyed, completely destroyed the uh, missile launchers and everything, anti missile launchers, anti you know missile defense systems of the Iranians, completely degraded the uh, the the Iranians' military capacity. But they've been firing, right? They just shut down two of America's expensive aircraft, right? Two of America's warplanes, and uh, they're looking for an American soldier now. And if they get a hold of that soldier as a prisoner of war, they're going to be gloating over this, and it's going to really tear up Americans, right? It's going to really tear up Americans. So see that there's a gap. There was always a credibility gap going into this war, because first of all, I've talked about Jussit Bellum and Justa Causa. There was no Justa Causa. There was no just cause for going into this war, right? There was no imminent threat, right? So there was already that credibility gap, and in the prosecution, it's worse with what happened yesterday. Um, Now, let me just, what I was going to do was just talk about the cost of the aircraft we lost. The A-10 Warthog, right? The A-10 Warthog it was built between 1972 and the 1980s. And back then it cost about $9.8 million a piece, right? The unit. But of course, there's adjustment for inflation. And in today's dollars, it's roughly $19 million, right? But because it was built such a long time ago, it had to be they're modernized, they're refurbished, they're upgraded. Plus the upgrading it costs about $40 million. So we're looking at a like $40 million plane, $40 to $50 million plane. That's the A-10 Warthog, right? We just got lost. Now the F-15E Strike Eagle, right? That was built, in 1998. They cost what, $31.1 a piece, roughly, right? But in today's money, it's about $100 million, right? So we've just blown about $150 million. We just lost that. Iran's cheap missiles or whatever they're using to hit America's aircraft, right? Cheap. It just cost us over 150 million, roughly $150 million, right? In just a split second, right? Like that, right? Apart from the lives, the risk to human life. Now, hopefully, the other, hopefully the other soldier survives. So our prayers are with him and his families that he survives. But again, as we say our prayers, remember that Iranians have lost um, over 2,000 people, depending on which news sources you use. Um, Estimates about 6,000 Iranians may have died. Between 2,000 to 6,000 Iranians may have died. In terms of injuries, over 25,000 injuries. Yes, Israelis as well. The reporting indicates that maybe roughly over 6,000 Israelis as well have been injured. Maybe as many as over 25 people killed. But again, there's a lot of distorted reporting going on. The US, roughly 13 to 15 soldiers have died. As I mentioned, over 500 people possibly injured. And then there are the GCC nations as well. Estimates maybe over 60 people have died. Lots of injuries in the GCC nations as well. And then there's Iraq. Maybe over 60 people have died. There are deaths in Syria, in Lebanon, roughly 1,000 deaths, and maybe 3,000 injured. The estimates, vary depending on the news sources, because this is an ongoing war. It's a very dangerous, so it's difficult to actually get the actual data. And, many of these people who've been injured, they might soon, they might soon pass on. It depends on the severity of the injuries. We don't know the severity of the injuries. It's difficult to track that. And of course, talking about the displacements, indications are that roughly 3.2 million people have been displaced in Iran, over a million displaced in Lebanon. So war is a very costly thing. You know, so hopefully, the uh, the prosecution of this war will be coming to an expedited termination, right? An expedited ceasefire within 3 weeks, as the president indicated. Um, it's again, the war you don't lose is one you don't fight. We're already in this one. The attitude of America should just be that we don't throw in good money after bad money. In any event, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.